now available in paperback and e-readers. Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. One of my viewers sent me an article talking about the African American exodus from New York City. Now, this article says over the last 20 years, the foundational Black American population of New York City has been declining as Black people have been leaving the city to go live in the South, go live in the West, and even go live in the suburbs. Now, this is a major reversal of migration patterns because Black people moved up to cities like New York City from 1910 to 1970 as part of the Great Migration. Now, the Great Migration primarily happened because after the Industrial Revolution, we had a lot of factory jobs here in the places like New York City, and we had a lot of businesses in places like New York City which paid a decent wage. Now, this was a better quality of life for a Black person than living in the Jim Crow South, where they were treated as second-class citizens, and Black people basically had to live looking over their shoulder out of fear of the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists who lived in the South. Now, the South basically made a miserable existence for Black people who could not go out here and get jobs because many of the racists out here looked to put Black people in a second-class position and only allowed them access to certain jobs such as janitors or other jobs like porter, and most people usually had to make do trying to go out here and sharecrop if they did not have their own businesses due to the segregation policies that were set in the South by the Blue Party. Now, most Black people down South saw how bad their quality of life was as related to lack of job prospects and having to deal with being oppressed under a Jim Crow system, which basically made them into second-class citizens, and this whole set of social rules set under the old Southern tradition were making Black people miserable and making it where they could not even go out here and build lives. Even when they went out here to go out and build their own towns like Rosewood and Black Wall Street, Black people had to deal with the jealousy of white folks and white women instigating things like the riots that destroyed towns like Rosewood and Black Wall Street, not to mention the fear of being lynched or being railroaded through an unethical criminal justice system where a Black man was basically guilty until proven innocent. These were the main reasons why so many Black people were motivated to leave places like the South, and in some cases the people in the South were so codependent on maintaining their abusive system, they even tried to pull Black people off trains when they tried to leave, and this was, again, the major motivating factors that led to so many Black people who were foundational Black Americans leaving to go to New York City as part of the Great Migration. Now, the start of this trend of Black people leaving New York City didn't really start 20 years ago. It actually started back in the late 1980s, and it started in the late 1980s after the crack epidemic ushered in a civil war between foundational Black Americans. Now, as foundational Black Americans had to deal with the scourge of the crack epidemic, many Black people who had good jobs were looking to go elsewhere because as the crack epidemic divided families and divided friends, as those who sold crack went out here and got addicted to the money and the power that they had, they went out here looking to shoot their brothers and their neighbors all over turf they did not own. And what happened was, as Black people got caught in the crossfire of that terrorism, what happened was many of those Black people who did have good jobs and were making good money decided to start looking to find a home outside of New York City. Many of the government workers started putting in transfers for other places down south or in the West or even in the Midwest. Others started to go out here and look to buy homes in the suburbs. Many black people who had two nickels to rub together, as the late David Carroll used to say, looked to move out of neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy and Bushwick due to that terrorism from the crack civil war. And as they looked to get out from under the onslaughts of gunfire and the zombies that basically roamed the streets, they looked to leave many predominantly black neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, and Sugar Hill that I talk about in my novel Spellbound. And these black people basically wanted to leave because they saw the suburbs as greener pastures. Now, another component of this was the spellbound mindset that I talk about in Spellbound, where some black people thought living among white people would be better because they always thought a white person's neighborhood would be better than theirs, and that it was another component that motivated a lot of black people to leave New York City. Now, another component that motivated a lot of black people to leave New York City was the fact that we had a lot of educated professional black folks starting to emerge as a demographic. And as we started to see more educated professional black folks starting to emerge as an economic base, what that economic base did was look to try to build wealth. So we had a large group of black people also looking to leave New York City because there was no way they could go out here and build wealth renting an apartment. Now, apartments back in the 80s were fairly cheap. However, the price of apartments started to go up as Rudy Giuliani instituted his quality of life initiative, and as the quality of life in the city improved, what happened was many of these apartments started to get expensive, and an apartment that used to cost $500 a month started to cost $1,000, and by the end of the century it's starting to get to $1,500, and now in the 2020s we're looking at apartments that cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a month. And most people, while they love New York City's nightlife and love in many of the things that are a part of the neighborhoods, they started to realize that this was not economically viable for them. And so we started to see a lot of black people looking to go out here and buy things like condos and buying things like homes. They were looking to become home owners. So a lot of black people started to move out of New York City because the price of rent was just too blank high. And because it was too blank high, so many black people started packing up their bags and looking to go out here and build equity by going out here and owning a condo, a co-op, or their own home outside of the city, because New York City has always had high taxes, and right now they have the second highest taxes in the nation, not to mention the highest insurance rates in the nation. So a lot of black people looking to go out here and save some money look to go out here and move outside of New York City. Again, quite a few moved out to the suburbs, others moved to other states like New Jersey and Connecticut, and others moved all the way down south. A lot of people just moved out of New York City because they just could not afford life in New York City. It was just too expensive for most black people. I mean, back in the 50s to the 70s, yeah, you could go out here and live very well because there were low taxes and low crime. But the whole thing is the tax rate continues to rise here in New York City ever since about the 80s. And since the tax rate is so high, it discourages a lot of people from looking to buy homes, and it discourages a lot of people from wanting to even consider trying to put roots here. So a lot of black people, when they started getting their money up, they wanted to go out here and stabilize their money. So they went out here and looked to go out and find a way to build their wealth base by owning their own home. So a lot of black people just started packing up their bags and moving elsewhere because the whole cost of living was too high. Now, the cost of living is another major reason why so many black people are leaving New York City. The cost of living here is the second highest in the nation, and most foundational black Americans look at that high cost of living compared to other areas down south like Atlanta, like Charlotte, like Raleigh, North Carolina, and Houston and other areas, and they start saying to themselves, I can go out here and live in places like Raleigh and Houston and Nashville and live a higher quality of life, all while dealing with less expenses. And that is another motivating factor for so many black people to leave New York City. A lot of people just can't afford to keep paying $3,000 to $5,000 a month rent, continuing to pay a large portion of their salary in taxes, and also having to deal with neighborhoods that are filthy, having to deal with high crime. These are all things that are motivating black people to leave New York City, and it's motivating a lot of black people to leave because, again, they just can't afford to stay here because everything is so expensive, and you're not getting much as related to what you're paying for compared to life in places like I've seen, like Nashville, and many places like Houston, and places like Miami and other cities that I'm seeing a lot more black people go to. You're getting more for your money in terms of experience of life. You're getting a cleaner quality of life. You're getting lower crime, and you're not having to deal with a lot of issues that is part of life here in New York City, like having to deal with guys with the boom cars, people just getting into fights on places like the train, or having to deal with Pookie and Ray Ray trying to go out here and rob local stores. No, people don't have to deal with that as much as they do in New York City, and that's why a lot of black people are leaving New York City. Now, when it comes to black men, a lot of black men are leaving New York City because New York City doesn't provide much job opportunities. Now, this is a reversal of trends as related to things that happened in the early 20th century. A lot of black men did come to New York City because there were opportunities at employment and opportunities to make more money than they would either working as a janitor or a porter or as a sharecropper. And that's a major reversal of trend that has happened due to discrimination from those on the left, as we've had more women enter the workforce. As more women have entered the workforce, black and white and minority, they have began projecting their stereotypes onto black men, and that has made it where many black men are not able to get employment opportunities here in places like New York City. I remember back in 2007 going to a hiring pool for the City University of New York and being blown off by women as part of what I call the HR brick wall. And this is the kind of thing that makes it where many black men look to walk away from New York City because they go all over looking for jobs, even civil service jobs, and run into discrimination. And as they run into discrimination, they see that there are next to no prospects for them to find employment. And if a black man can't find employment in a city, eventually what he does is decide to go look for employment prospects outside of the city, and he looks for those prospects outside of the city and goes and lives in those cities and becomes a taxpayer in those cities. So a lot of black men, they just go out here and leave New York City because there's no job prospects, similar to what happened in the Jim Crow South. And because many black men don't want to wind up living up under a woman, what they do is go out here and find a job elsewhere And after they leave, this is one of the reasons why New York City is losing so many black men. Many black men just see that while they're here, they can go out here and go to school, get an education, get a degree like I did. But when they go out here and look for a job, what happens is those black men get blown off by employers. And when they get blown off by employers and temp agencies and other individuals, what they do is say, hey, I can't find anything here. And they wind up moving elsewhere. Now, this black exodus is happening, and it's really doing damage to New York City overall, because New York City has lost a major chunk of its tax base, because most of those people who were a part of the Great Migration and their children, they were the ones who were a core tax base here in New York City. And while they have been replaced by a large population of immigrants and others from other parts of the country, they are not really the strong tax base that black people were. Now, the black tax base basically was one that allowed a lot of revenue to come into the city and allowed a lot of money to become into the city so that they could go out here and have fiscal stability. Unfortunately, you had a lot of rich people who took that black base for granted and looked to try to gentrify that black base out of neighborhoods like Harlem and neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy. And they went out here and thought, oh, we'll bring in these white hipsters. Moreover, they also thought they would go out here and participate in government programs like the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, looking to go out here and build businesses in those neighborhoods, pushing the black businesses out. However, after 20 years, all of this has basically backfired, and it's backfired because after many of those businesses got their Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone grants, all of those businesses basically wound up closing, leaving holes and voids in neighborhoods like Harlem, and taking a lot of jobs out of the community. And they have also gone out here, and a lot of these hipsters, because they have trust funds and lots of money, they come and play in neighborhoods like Harlem and Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, going out here, looking to go out here and have their little trendy life experience. And then when they start to get serious, what they do is pack up their bags and move to the suburbs after they've had their experience like what they saw on shows like Friends and Seinfeld. And New York City basically is now in a dire place as related to its fiscal state. And it's in that place because it did not look to invest in foundational black Americans who wanted to lay a foundation in places like New York City, but instead of getting support from many of the politicians, including black politicians like a David Dinkins or an Eric Adams or many of the city council people, what we got was shown the door, because many of those spellbound politicians thought that, oh, the white people will go out here and allow us to make more money, and created a covert contract with the hipsters and the gentrifiers. But the hipsters and the gentrifiers have basically destroyed the quality of life of New York City, and them destroying the quality of life is very similar to what happened when the government went out here and supported the crack epidemic and brought crack to black neighborhoods. It just left a wasteland, and that's what New York City is right now. And I think it could have been a much better place had they gone out here and supported black people. But those black people have left New York City, and those older black people who have worked for places like the MTA in the city, they have gone out here and retired and are now moving down south because they want to save money, because they're now on fixed incomes. And New York City isn't a place that really supports fixed incomes, with apartments now ranging from $3,000 to $5,000, even $10,000 a month. And anybody who's going out here and work to build, they're not interested in spending $3,000 to $5,000 or $10,000 on rent. No, if you saved up enough money, you could buy a home for that much. Moreover, you have to go through so many hoops to get an apartment here. I mean, you have to have a guarantor. You have to go out here and save close to $20,000 in cash just to get an apartment, and you need at least $1 million in cash just to buy an apartment or a condo or a home. So going out and trying to live in New York City is just so expensive and so prohibitively expensive that many people are just looking to move elsewhere. And you'll have some elite types out here thinking they're going to have a playground like Dubai. But what's going to happen is they're not going to be able to sustain that, because if nobody can afford to just pay to live here, and the taxes and everything is so high and the wages are really low, a lot of what's going to happen is life in New York City is going to deteriorate. And the main reason why it's going to deteriorate is because there are no black people in the city, because black people are an economic base that basically allows many communities to live very well. It is 97% of black dollars that allow many of the foreign businesses here to be able to maintain their middle class lifestyle and send their kids to private schools. It is 97% of black dollars that create the tax base that allow much of these communities to do well. And 97% of that tax base, again, pays for the roads, pays for the libraries, pays for everything. But because the black people are leaving New York City's life is started to decline. And I saw this all the way back starting in the late 80s with the crack epidemic. And ever since then, New York City's quality of life has really started to fall way off. And it's fallen way off because black people, again, they are an economic base that many people take for granted. And again, many people don't respect black people. They don't respect the black dollar. They don't respect the black quality of life. And they don't understand that black people improve the quality of life wherever they go. No matter what you hear in the media about Pookies and Ray Rays, they are, again, a small percentage of black people, and I say less than a percent. Most working class brothers and sisters, we go out here and look to build and improve the quality of life in our neighborhoods. We look to maintain a high standard of life. And when you push out black people, you destroy the quality of life in your neighborhoods. And a black exodus from New York City has the same impact that it had on the South, because when we had the Great Migration, basically all of that old Southern tradition life basically fell completely apart as they went out here and oppressed black people. It made the South poorer, because had they left towns like Rosewood and Black Wall Street alone, you would have had a strong economic base in the South. But because of racism and jealousy, that entire base fell apart, and the entire South wound up being controlled by the Blue Party's corruption, which made it where schools didn't get funded, roads weren't taken care of, law enforcement wasn't taken care of, and again, the entire South turned into just a hellhole of a community. And the same thing happened in New York City when they went out here and looked to wage war on black people with the war on drugs. The quality of life fell completely apart. And again, most people don't see the power of black people or the power of the black dollar or how it improves the quality of life wherever black people go. Most people don't want to acknowledge that black people have an impact on the places that they live and an impact on the quality of life in those places. And this is why most of America is struggling right now, because we don't really understand the value of black people and how black people transform a place where they're in. And again, black people are leaving New York City because they don't see an opportunity to get the quality of life they want. Black men don't see an opportunity to get the jobs that they want. Black people don't see an opportunity to live very well, so they're looking to leave New York City, and this is the main reason why we have this exodus from New York City. And it's a reversal of fortune from what happened in the Jim Crow South. As we've seen the North get the same type of policies, we're seeing the Jim Crow North emerge, and those same policies that turned against black people are turning them to go elsewhere so they can live a better life. Now, this was a article that was sent to me by a viewer, and I felt passionate enough to talk about it. And if you have an article that's interesting and you want to send it to me, you can send it through sjsdirectamerica@gmail.com. Now, if you want to pick up my book Spellbound, which talks a little bit about the spellbound mindset that motivates black people to leave places like New York City, You can pick that book up on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find it at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s in this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Get your copy of John Haynes, 1987 in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, All About the Goddess. The Goddess Next Door bears all in the art studio to catch a campus stalker in this action-packed Isis series mystery. Get your copy of Isis, All About the Goddess in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.